Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first webinar in the 2020-2021 webinar series. We're actually in our third year of the webinar series, which is really exciting. Today, we are gearing up for back to school during COVID-19, which is really part 2 of our popular open discussion webinar that we had in the spring on COVID-19 in the classroom and within your counseling practice. So this is really an opportunity for administrators, counselors, advisors, and teachers to explore and discuss everything you need to know for going into this school year. It is really a different time. It's a very different school year for us globally. So we have a lot to cover this morning. We have some important updates for you, some great guest speakers. And we also want to save time to share best practices and save time for discussion. We have lots of folks, over 350 folks registered this morning. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into what we plan to cover today. Texas OnCourse, as many of you know, is a state-funded initiative designed to improve college and career advising and readiness across the state. With Texas OnCourse, all Texas students, no matter where they come from or where they're headed, have a plan for success after high school. So we are live this morning, but we do know that many educators view our webinars via YouTube after it has been recorded. So if you could just take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel, as you can see here, youtube.com, Texas OnCourse right there. Then you have access to all of our webinar content, plus valuable updates on college and career and military readiness. You can see notifications and you can have access to all of that information and the recordings that we post on YouTube. So let's just quickly go over our agenda. This is our discussion topic today, and we are gearing up for back to school during COVID-19. We have Tisha Kolick, a close colleague of Texas OnCourse and Region 13 counseling specialist. We've got a really important accountability update that was put out by TEA just recently, and Tisha is going to summarize that for us. So things you need to know on accountability and CCMR going into 2020, 2021. And then we're going to talk a little bit about data-driven goals for 2020 this school year, and then just things you need to know and things that we have at Texas OnCourse that will help support you at your, in your year at a glance. Some resources, calendars, and things like that on college, career, and military readiness. And then we have some staff at Texas OnCourse. Samantha Gonzalez is from our content and resources team. She's going to cover some really important COVID-19 updates and content that her team has embedded within the academy. And then Allison Rizzolo from our marketing and communications team has some really good updates on staying up to date, best practices that we've heard from educators along the way since COVID in the spring, and how to go sort of into the school year with your students and supporting your students and their families. And then we've also saved some time for open discussion. We did a lot of things, we had to learn a lot and really switch gears in the spring because of COVID. We have a lot of schools that we've heard from that are doing things a little bit differently this year, and also still planning. So we'll have a lot of opportunity for people to ask questions and respond to comments and things like that. And we have a full hour. We don't always go an hour, but we've reserved till 11 a.m. And we also have a recording that we will send you via email. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name's Laura Guggen, and I'm Assistant Director of Program Implementation at Texas OnCourse. Tisha?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Tisha Kolick, and I work at Region 13 here in Austin, supporting school counselors. And I'm also on the accountability team for Region 13, helping schools with their CCMR strategies and questions. Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Texas OnCourse.
Thank you, Tisha.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Samantha Gonzalez, the Content and Resources Program Manager here at Texas OnCourse. I have a background in college access and success, and at Texas OnCourse, I support all things content with curating content and maintaining the content.
And hi, everyone. This is Allison Rizzolo. I head up marketing and communications with Texas OnCourse, and just make sure that all of the amazing work that my colleagues are doing gets to you in some format.
Perfect. Thank you to all of our guest speakers this morning for those quick introductions. So we would like to get started and hear all of the things that you all are gearing up to do this school year. I realize with all of the unknowns, there's a little bit of anxiety going into making decisions and seeing what the school year will be like. And I think we're all really looking forward to some positive things as well. So if you don't mind going ahead and typing in the chat box, what are you most excited about this year? We are really curious to see what you are looking forward to and what is exciting. Maybe you have a new project. Great, I see some using innovation to do things differently this school year. Absolutely, thank you, Nick. And seeing our students, absolutely, Tracy, that is very exciting. Even if you're not seeing them at the beginning of the school year, eventually, I think this year we will see them. Cheryl said, seeing my students from last year. Everyone seems to be trying new tools, learning different virtual platforms. Coming back to school is very exciting. I agree, Karina. New designs implemented during spring. Different ways to connect with new freshmen from Carrie. Strengthening partnerships. Oh, it's actually really nice to see so many ideas. It's hard to keep up with the chat box, but I'm following. Bringing our students back and getting started with all of the new ways to teach our students. Absolutely. New and neat virtual resources. Yeah, we are really changing things around. Everybody seems to be learning new virtual platforms, our students as well. Well, that's fantastic. Feel free to continue. We're going to move on to the next slide. We just have a quick poll. We want to think about our yearly planning. It doesn't really seem like we had much of a summer, and here we are planning for the school year. But we're going to go ahead and we have set up a poll. Give me 1 second. I will launch it and you should see it. All right, so we have a poll question. Do you have goals or measures for your 2020 to 2021 CCMR outcomes? Go ahead and take a minute or so. I see all of your responses going in there, and you can see our answer choices. Yeah, if you haven't answered the poll, go ahead and take a minute. It looks like the majority of our group has some specific measurable goals set. I'll give you another 30 seconds or so. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end it, and then we'll be able to see the results. Okay, so we're pretty even, but some folks are not sure, or they might not be aware of those goals. That could be due to COVID and all of the other decisions that are going on. 16% of our attendees have no concrete CCMR goal set. 24% have few goals set or goals that are set, but they might be vague or not very specific. And then 29%, our winner here, is some specific measurable goals have been set. And then 14% of our attendees have a number of very specific goals and outcomes for CCMR this year. I think that this is a really great representation of exactly where districts are at. That's really why we're creating, webinars like this one to support you all, because there have been so many decisions that folks have to make going into this school year. And so maybe CCMR outcomes and goals have fallen by the wayside, or they need some tweaking, that sort of thing. So hopefully in our webinar this morning, we'll be able to give you some strategies and share some ideas. Okay, so I'm going to go and close our poll and you should be able to see. All right, so we're going to transition over to Tisha Kolick, who recently attended the TEA accountability update. So Tisha, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. And Laura, just one housekeeping question. You're going to help me with slides as I go through them?
Yes, you can also tell me when to advance if I'm not keeping up.
The beauty of learning how to Zoom across the state of Texas. Okay, thank you, Laura. I'm excited to be here today. I was looking forward to this webinar, and working with Texas OnCourse on this content has been a lot of fun. It's been a journey similar to what all you have been working on, because sometimes the plans that you're making need to change. And so we experienced that in preparing. Last week, we were able to have Jonathan Delgado from TEA. The Performance Reporting Division is the division at TEA that works on the accountability manual and all the accountability supports that you see in your work with CCMR and A through F ratings. And he did such an excellent job. And at the end of that webinar, I just asked Jonathan if we could use some of his TA slides today to give you some of the highlights. Towards the end of my brief presentation, I'm going to show you where you can find the full recording and his entire slide deck. All of those are available for you to look at. They're on our Region 13 accountability website. So we're just going to highlight some of the pieces today as we go on, and I will, on the next slide, show you what is the highlights in the CCMR manual. And so those chapters have already been published. There's the hyperlink that you can review, chapters 1 through 11. I recommend the summary of changes document right before you see the published manual and the published chapters. You'll see a link that you can click on that's the summary of changes. And it's a short document. I would recommend going through that, especially if you've been on the accountability train for the last few years. And so that will tell you some of the changes that were made. One of the things to note is in chapter 1, in that summary document, for example, it says that all schools and districts will be declared not rated, declared state of disaster. And so that will be the rating that all school districts and campuses will receive across the state of Texas for this past year. In the next slide, I will highlight some of the new exciting information that Jonathan shared with us last week. 2 of these items I'm going to talk about today, and these are scheduled for an August 17th release date. I think you're really going to look forward to accessing these tools, both if you're new and you've been in the field. The CCMR Verifier and the CCMR Tracker will both be available. These other items he talked about in his full hour webinar with us, and there's other slides included that speak about this identified for improvement and support, the PEG list, and the post-secondary outcomes report. But 2 we're going to highlight with this audience is the Verifier and the Tracker. On the next slide, I have pulled from Jonathan's slide deck. He highlights the features of the CCMR Verifier. I want you to know that you can download the CCMR Verifier. It will be available in the Teal account. So whoever in your district has Teal account access will have access to the CCMR Verifier. The corrections for this Verifier will be submitted through the Teal account, and it's for the list of 2018-19 graduates, plus any non-graduating 12th graders. You will have till October 1st to submit this documentation, and this verifier can only be used to correct non-PEMS indicators. The window to submit PEMS corrections for the files has already closed. So this will be things like your assessment, such as SAT and ACT. Perhaps you had a student who had an error when they put in their social security number or their date of birth or their high school name. That's where the verifier is going to help you correct that information. The next slide, Jonathan highlighted the CCMR verifier walkthrough. And so in the teal account, it'll look something like this with 2 buttons. These 2 buttons will give you access to the CCMR Tracker and the CCMR Verifier. It's important to note that you can download the CCMR Verifier and then work on your corrections. When you share this document, if you're the one that has teal account access, he asks us to really stress the importance of understanding the sensitive nature of the data on this document. All of the students' social security numbers are in this file. So when you download this file, it doesn't scramble the social security numbers, nor does it hide them. And so as your district and team and leaders are sharing this report, because it is a downloadable document this year, please be mindful that it does have the social security numbers and be sensitive to this information. One of the most important things besides that is to note that it is not compatible with the Microsoft Internet Explorer. TEA advises that you use Google Chrome or the Microsoft Edge web browser, and then your information will be presented correctly. One thing that is not on this slide that Jonathan spoke to is I've been getting several questions about the CCMR outcome bonus and what that's going to look like with all of the COVID impact this year. And pretty soon here in August, the division will release a new update and status of where that's at. I will show you a slide in just a minute of how to stay subscribed to that information so that if you are a team member working on CCMR outcome bonus for your district and campus, you can receive the latest information about that. On the next slide, we've showed you the CCMR Tracker highlights. And so this is a new tool that'll be available through the Performance Reporting Division at TEA. They've also worked with the CCMP division. That's the College Career Military Prep. Those are 2 different departments at TEA that work together for CCMR outcomes. And so this CCMR Tracker is going to help give you a preview of where your students are and what they've achieved. It will be for students in grades 9 through 12, and then students for 19-20. Because remember, you can submit any of their achievements, say they get an industry-based certification or something like that this summer, and so that can be submitted to TEA in a later submission. No corrections will be submitted to TEA through this document because this is simply a tracker. This is a preview of how your students are doing with their CCMR. You know, several of you said that you are 29% of you in the earlier poll reported that you've got some specific CCMR goals. And in my mind, this is going to be your tool this year to help you track those to achieve those goals and those benchmarks that you've set for your students at your campus. If you see errors on the CCMR tracker, what Jonathan told our audience is you need to work with your testing vendors to make corrections prior to the student's graduation. That's the most accurate way to ensure that your CCMR is tracking and reporting what it should. So remember earlier on the CCMR Verifier report for the non-PEMS submissions, I mentioned that some of those errors are related to assessment, specifically SAT and ACT, again, where a student had an error in their identifying information. Well, through the CCMR tracker, you might catch some of those early. And so when you do that, you won't submit that correction to TEA at this point. Instead, you'll work with the College Board and ACT to make those corrections. On this next slide, we showed you how to stay caught up with TEA and their information. If you haven't signed up for the updates, I did a little screenshot here for you. This is where all the information will be released. They typically release accountability and CCMR information weekly, almost every week. And one of the features that I like in their updates that comes out is at the bottom, there's frequently asked questions, and they'll highlight a question each week. And so I've learned quite a bit of content and shared that with our districts in Region 13 as well. And so you can subscribe there, and then you'll start getting the weekly bulletin. Okay, and I think then what I wanted to show you was our Region 13 accountability. This is when you go to Region 13 accountability, this is the screen that you'll see, so you'll know you're on the right website. And so what I wanted to do is show you that the resources tab where the red arrow is pointing, that's where you will click for the recording that I mentioned that Jonathan did with Region 13 last week. So I checked this morning, the recording has been uploaded and his full PDF PowerPoint for you to look at and share with your colleagues. All of that is available on our resources page there. And again, no charge for that. We do have 2 upcoming workshops at Region 13. We kind of do a unique offering, and that's why I wanted to highlight it this morning. In September, we do a workshop for new leaders to accountability. So if you are new to your role, this might interest you. And then that's September 14th, and on October 6th, we're going to do another accountability update for CCMR and PEAMS. All of those specific information is on our workshop tab there. I anticipate both will be virtual. For sure, the September will be a virtual workshop, so that might interest some of you across the state. Okay. All right, so what I wanted to do next was first give a shout out to Jonathan Delgado for letting me share some of those highlights today, and I hope you're excited about both of those tools, the CCMR Verifier and the CCMR Tracker. And kind of what seems like a next step to me, and based on my former role as a director of counselor and then doing the CCMR there at Region 13, was the importance of yearly planning. And so I think we have a poll question, right, Laura?
Yeah, so thank you, Tisha. We're going to go ahead and launch our next poll. You can see the prompt here. And it's really, we're just curious, do you have a year at a glance plan that ensures a focus on CCMR programming? So let me go ahead and open that poll up. No, we already saw this. Okay, well, I'm not able to launch the second poll we have here, but you can just go ahead and use the chat box for your response. Do you have a year at a glance plan that ensures a focus on CCMR programming? Feel free to tell us a little bit about that, and just go ahead and use the chat box. So some folks are new to their position. Some people are working on their plan based on data that we have from last year. That's great. Yeah, it sounds like some folks here, Tisha, I see, need some ideas. Working on the plan now, a scope and sequence.
That's wonderful, because that's going to be the next content that we talk about. I know that many of you have worked on creating a year at a glance. Some of you came from the field of teaching, and so you had to create yearly plans. And so it's really no different than that. I'm excited that we have so many new people. Welcome to this journey. Texas OnCourse is a beautiful resource and great network for you to be a part of. And so I hope you use their tools and features, as well as connect with other people in nearby districts. Collaboration is the key to success, especially during this time. So I think we can go ahead and dive into what we would do next now that we see some of the feedback. And so one thing that I've learned over the years, I'm starting my 25th year in education this year. And is kind of intentional programming, especially in today's time. Being intentional with your time and your resources is more important than ever. We face challenges with delivering instruction, challenges with meeting with our students. And when we have a plan, that anxiety and worry tends to decrease. And so we're going to talk about the different aspects. For many of you, this is a review, and we're just kind of getting back in the game because we've had a summer break. And so we know that many of you are veterans out there. So this is just kind of getting your mindset ready for this upcoming school year that has great potential, because I think that educators are resourceful to find innovative ways to meet students where they are. Our first thing is collecting data about the existing programs. And so if you can work with your school district to survey the needs and the attitudes, sometimes we forget about attitudes and where students are currently. We're going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. We definitely remember to do the needs at the beginning, and we plan our programming accordingly. This is the best way to advocate for your initiatives, to impact CCMR, to do college and career advising. When you have a survey that's data driven and you take that to your school leaders with the highlights, it's very likely that they will join in with your focus and your plan to meet the needs based on the survey results that you get. And then you use data gathered from other sources. You know, look at the college and career military indicators that your students have achieved in the past. That's where I would start to set my first benchmark when we're talking about have you set some outcome goals for your CCMR. And then the next part that we'll do after this is understand that the needs assessment establishes your baseline data. Oftentimes I've heard colleagues feel self-conscious about where some of those achievements are with students. And I challenge you to think differently about that. This is your jumping off point. And so we need to see where we're at so that we can have growth. And then that way you can also identify areas that need the most support. When you're advocating for programming and resources to help students have the most opportunities, you need to have some areas that you need to ask for more support. And so don't be self-conscious about those that pop up on the needs assessment as well. When you're looking at your needs assessment, I think it's a good idea to collaborate with someone, a fresh set of eyes. And as you're looking at the data, really prioritize the time and resources. I think that counselors and college career advisors, educators as a whole, are yes people. And yes people are, yes, I can do that. I'll be glad to do that for students. Yes, I can do that for parents. Yes, I can do that for my teachers. And then we walk off thinking, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get that done. And so just being really mindful of that this year. And then remember that you're going to evaluate change over time. And so some of that's going to be the perception data of your stakeholders. That's your students and your parents, your community, and your leaders. And so just assessing throughout the year, maybe doing a mid-year needs assessment to see your growth and to make a change if needed for the spring semester. So this is like your first draft. So when you're looking at your needs assessment, you're creating your year at a glance. That's a draft that's changed each month as life happens. And so give yourself that grace and don't view that as a black and white document, because that can be really stressful if you do. And so as we go to the next slide, we can see another question here. Are we going to put this in the chat box, Laura?
Yeah, so this is just, let's pause for a minute here, Tisha. Those were some great examples of how to sort of build your needs assessment. And so we're just kind of curious from folks that are on the webinar, what are some examples of questions that you might ask on a needs assessment? Tisha mentioned, you know, attitudes and where students are at. If you want to think about what you might ask this year and compared to other years. I see what worked well. What do you need from us? Any other examples?
This is where you can steal ideas from each other, because sometimes you stare at a needs assessment and you get overwhelmed. Also, while you're putting those questions in the chat, check with your leaders, because there may be already a survey going out to parents, and it's much better to add on to a survey so parents don't get 5 or 6 or students or staff. And so check with your leaders, because most school districts will send out a needs assessment annually.
Yeah, and I would say too, Tisha, for anyone that's seeing those surveys go out, just to ask and gauge how folks should start the school year this year. I know as a parent, I have filled out several surveys, some that have been the same ones a couple of times. So that's a great point. Yeah, so I'm seeing things like, what resources can I provide you? Wi-Fi questions, technology questions, topics.
Another great resource is many of you, especially those of you that said you're new to your position or new to your district, many of your districts do a senior exit survey. And so seeing what the seniors that just graduated shared with the staff about, who helped them the most with financial aid, who helped them the most with their college planning. And usually that's a choice of parent, teacher, counselor, administrator, other, maybe youth director. And so see what trends in your district, and ask about former survey data, because it doesn't change. Well, this past spring may be a lot different with the survey results, but look back on your former graduating classes.
Great. So you all can feel free to continue to add some of those ideas. We can even send a transcript of the ideas that we see here, or put together a one-pager for you. So those are there. These are some great examples. And you touched on this, Tisha, but also keeping in mind your audience, student plans for after high school. Yes, we will share these. Absolutely. All right, Tisha, I'm going to move on to strategic questions.
Okay. And so I think more important than ever is to be mindful of the length of your needs assessment. Guys, it needs to be short and brief. So you need to be real intentional, like we talked earlier, about the data that you need. If you're doing a collaborative needs assessment, sections to consider, we listed there below. Some of those your leadership's going to ask about, and then you can tag on the post-secondary plans and digital citizenship needs. With a lot of the remote learning happening and more Wi-Fi and hotspots and laptops going out, if you can partner with someone to add some digital citizenship to your year at a glance this year for some initiatives and programming, maybe a parent Zoom or webinar, I think that's going to be really important this year. But just keeping in mind Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basic needs of food and shelter, and then looking at mental wellness to social emotional learning, and then helping kids plan for after graduation. Our next two slides have kind of the power four. And so when you're doing a data-driven intentional program, these were 4 things that I found in literature and in resources, and that resonated with me based on my former roles. And so examine the program activities and determine the type of service that is to be delivered. So what are you going to do for parents that are junior parents this year? And then how are you going to reach out to them? Is this going to be a Zoom? Is this going to be a recording? So that's kind of what we mean by number 1. Number 2 is you're going to review the activity and determine the results. So when you delivered the activity, did it work? Do some kind of survey or assessment to see if it's something you should continue. We only want to continue those things that are successful, and we want to revise those things that need some adjustment. Be mindful of the use of time and expertise for the project. So many of us are working with limited resources. We have larger caseloads. We're going to be doing in-person and online support. And so be strategic about what you say yes to, and be strategic about your initiatives. And then look at your program budgets to see, can you pay a speaker? Can you add different platforms? Can you add additional resources for your families? And so those last 2 are going to help you have the energy and the capacity to make it through the school year. And so I encourage you to be mindful of that. And then data-driven decision-making, we've got 4 things here. Understand implementing intentional programming, writing annual student outcome goals so that you're focusing your initiatives, differentiate between what you're going to deliver as a team of 1 versus what other team members on your campus like your teachers, your PE teachers, your coaches, anybody else that can work on this initiative, and then find ways to share your success with your stakeholders. And so again, you'll have access to this. Thank you for letting me share my thoughts with you, Laura. And I think you're ready for the next portion.
Thank you so much, Tisha. All right, we're gonna pause here real quickly, and you can use the chat box to let us know if you could just share one of your initiatives, strategies, or programs that focuses on proving CCMR goals this year. It can be any idea that you've had that you've discussed, but any initiative or strategy that's gonna focus on those goals. I'll give you a moment to do that. You can take a minute and think about those initiatives or strategies, and I'm going to go ahead and, in the interest of time, turn it over to Samantha from our content team to talk about our COVID-19 content in the Academy.
Thanks, Laura. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So here at Texas OnCourse, we want to make sure that you have up-to-date information and the resources that will support you during advising sessions with students and families, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have added available COVID-19 information and resources to the introductions of the following modules that you see here. We have also included the target release date for these updates, which will be occurring throughout August. Beginning tomorrow, you should see some of these updates happening. The following are examples of what kind of content that is going to be added to the modules that were listed on the previous screen. For instance, the NCAA recently sent out their monthly newsletter and provided how they will be approving distance, e-learning, or hybrid programs for the 2021 academic school year. ACT has also sent out their monthly newsletters and have added additional national testing dates to their fall 2020 testing schedule, as well as updating their FAQs page to include COVID-19 updates to support you answer any questions coming from students. So here's an example of how the Texas OnCourse Academy layout and dashboard looks once the learner has logged in and wants to check their progress and explore our modules. For today, I will use the basic principles of post-secondary pathways module from the list that was listed on the previous screens to show how to locate a module's introduction within the Academy. So from this screen, you'll select the post-secondary pathways content area, which is selected here. And then within the post-secondary's content area, you will see the badges that are available within that content area. And in that screen, you will select post-secondary pathways foundational knowledge to get to the basic principles of post-secondary pathways module. So that module will be the only module that appears for that badge. And once you're in that module screen, you will just click on introduction. And once the COVID-19 information has been added to that module, you will see that information at the end of the introduction. And I will pass it back to Laura.
Great. Allison, we're gonna go ahead and let you cover this information really quickly. I just wanna identify, we had several different strategies and ideas, test prep sessions, CCMR campus meetings, counseling goals for elementary school students. I'm taking a look because we missed a few. SAT prep curriculum with Avid, Gen Tech's week, and implementing that on focusing on CCMR all week long, trivia, college shirts, those kinds of things. Early decision, early action, and meeting with juniors. So there are some great ideas. We will go ahead and compile all these and send them out to you, but thank you all for sharing some of those initiatives and strategies. And then Will mentioned using data to target specific groups. Absolutely, that will really drive CCMR outcomes and data for accountability. So Allison, we're going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Laura. So again, this is Allison with the Marketing and Communications team with Texas OnCourse. You know, summer is always really, I mean, as it is for all of y'all as well, a busy, exciting time of year for us. We're gearing up, you know, around now for really curating all of our resources and creating new resources to help educators with back to school. And this year, you know, is certainly no different, although it's a little bit more uncharted as we see here on the screen. And our theme for going back to school this year is Texas Tough Together, because Texas OnCourse is here to help, you know, everyone get to wherever it is we're going on whatever pathway we end up on, doing it together, and we're here to help you. So in the next session, I'm just going to go through some resources and tips that we have going into the new school year for you. First, to kick it off for our administrators on the call, tomorrow we are going to be debuting a brand new guide, Getting Started with Texas OnCourse. And this guide includes 8 easy steps for you to start adopting the Texas OnCourse programs at the district level. So that includes our middle school, college, and career readiness curriculum, as well as our free professional development platform. This guide will include an overview of how all of our resources align with CCMR indicators. It will include a calendar of professional development using the Academy, and then a scope and sequence for a curriculum for lots of different scenarios. If you're interested in receiving this Getting Started guide, I am about to add a link to the chat box where you can enter your email, and we'll be sure to email you the guide tomorrow. I'm next going to move into just some tips and practices that we heard from the education community, from our district fellows and from other educators that we reached out to going into the new school year. A lot of these principles are going to be very familiar to all of us, but I want to walk through some really practical ways that we have heard our educator community put these principles into practice. So number 1 is to get visual. We know that our students respond best, and we respond best really, to easily digestible information in a visual form, not a wall of text, most certainly. So one thing that we heard some of our fellows doing, we launched an Instagram account during the spring, kind of fast forwarded that during the beginnings of the coronavirus, and some of our fellows have taken screenshots of our graphics in Instagram. So for example, we have, you know, a quick little summary of the fall SAT dates, and they've taken a screenshot of that and dropped it into an email, a text, or their LMS for their students. So that's a quick and easy way to count on us to get information to your students. The next principle along the same lines is to let us, and you can go ahead and advance the slide, let us do the legwork. So in addition to our Instagram account, which you can feel free to grab content from, every Thursday we do a video on Facebook Live. This is my colleague Rose, our communications coordinator, and she may be a familiar face to you already. If not, be sure to tune in to our Facebook page. We just started up these Facebook Lives again last week. We do them every Thursday. Right now we're going live around 4 p.m. That might change as we go into the new school year, depending on your needs. But what we do is we just really read through all of the most recent updates and distill them in video form. You know, here we see a screenshot of updates from the NCAA Eligibility Center and NCAN with a new toolkit. So we just provide you with some of the most important new resources and information we've seen out in the field. We also publish transcripts of these videos on our blog as well. So if you're not one for video, which I am not, we also have a transcript. Our next principle is to humanize with video. And I think that we know, obviously, that it's great to diversify the way that we're delivering content. I heard one of our fellows mention that one real benefit of video was that her students were really comforted by seeing her face and hearing her voice. And I think that that's something that we tend to overlook when we talk about video, and just another reason to start integrating video a little bit more into your practice. The most recommended resource that we have heard is called Screencastify. You may have heard of this already. It is a free Google Chrome plugin that lets you take videos, screen share, add all sorts of elements to your videos. This screenshot on the webinar slide is just 4 separate blogs that we have where educators have mentioned Screencastify. So I just wanted to demonstrate, how recommended this particular resource is. So it gets the little Texas OnCourse seal of approval. Our next principle is to help your colleagues help you. The Texas OnCourse Academy is not just for counselors. And we know that all of our counselors and advisors on the line are going to be even more busy than you usually are. So we want to make sure that you're aware of the different modules in the Texas OnCourse Academy, that you can say to your economics teachers or your junior English teachers, hey, you guys should check out these modules. It'll help you answer some questions that your students might have related to post-secondary plans. I just added another link to the chat box that links to this handout. There's a screenshot of on the screen, which just lists out the different modules that are applicable to all sorts of different educators in your school. Our next principle is to meet your students where they are. And again, this is a basic one that we all know, but there are a few things that I heard when I was talking to our fellows that I think it's easy to overlook, and when we're as busy as we are. And one of those pieces of information that a fellow shared with me is that, a lot of times, right now in particular, our students have lots of questions, but they may be really reluctant to ask those questions publicly in front of their peers. And that's probably particularly true for our middle school students. So one great thing to keep in mind is to make sure that you, number one, let your students know that you are open to questions and no question will be overlooked or scoffed. And number two, make sure that they know how to ask you questions privately. And don't assume that they know how to do it on whatever technical platform that you're using. So this is just a screenshot of sending a question in anonymously on Zoom. Just make sure your students know how to do that as well, whatever platform you're using. Our next principle is to repurpose content. What are pieces of content lesson plans that you've used in the past that you can kind of easily transform to use in a mostly remote or digital environment? One thing that we heard from one of our fellows is that she repurposed lesson plans from our college and career readiness curriculum, made them a little bit more student-facing, took out references to group work, and plopped them into her Canvas instance for her students. This is something that we've been putting into practice since the spring, repurposing our own content for you all in a totally different context. And the screenshot here is of a COVID support page for students, and definitely welcome you to check that out, where we have shared lots of different videos and student activity sheets that you can easily share with students if you're working with them remotely. And our next principle is to look to your community. A few things that we heard from our fellows. They have worked with their college admissions counselors, with their college advisors to deliver virtual presentations to their students, looked to see if there's any local organizations doing virtual financial aid nights so that they don't have to do the legwork on that. We also had a fellow mention that she got in touch with her former students who were POSSE recipients to talk through her current students over how to go through that application process. So look to your student alumni, your former student alumni as well, to see if they can share any great information in a virtual presentation. And I'm going to end with just some resources from Texas OnCourse for you to use going into the fall. So first, these are resources available now. We do have a couple of COVID-19 pages, one for educators, so to support your practice, and one for students. And the one for students is for you to directly lift resources from that page and just send them right onto your students. I am adding those 2 links in the chat right now. We also have a new edition of the College and Career Readiness curriculum for middle school that you can find under the tools menu of our website. Be sure to check that out. And then finally, I definitely invite you to refer to our blog. I'm going to add a link to the blog in the chat. Our blog is organized by tags. If you click on the coronavirus tag, you will see lots of great content that we published all through the spring and summer to support you, whatever your school situation might look like now. We also have a number of resources on the next slide that are coming up shortly. First, we are going to publish on our blog a guide to the updated modules that Samantha just talked you through, so you can have that information quickly and easily. We're working with a number of different organizations and agencies kind of led by Get Schooled for an initiative called Future Forward Texas, which will include monthly digital packages for students to help them persist and remain on the college-bound path despite COVID-19. That's going to launch at the end of August. We're working with other organizations, including TEA, on the Texas College Bridge initiative to, help ensure that our students become college ready and persist in going to college. And that project will include a toolkit for counselors, just kind of walking counselors and advisors through, making sure that their students who have not yet demonstrated college readiness remain on that path despite COVID-19. So that Texas College Bridge project will launch also at the end of the month. And then next week, we will have another webinar on navigating social justice issues in college and career advising. So we're pretty busy right now, lots of stuff coming up. How can you make sure that you receive all of the information about these new resources that we're making available? The next screen, we have just a screenshot of our blog. Again, this is kind of like the cog of information for us. So always go to our blog. You can subscribe for signups. You can see in the bottom right hand of that screenshot, you can enter your email and get a weekly digest of blog posts or a monthly digest. So just make sure you're always referring to our blog because we'll always have our information there. The next slide includes, I think, our Facebook group. Yep. So we have a Facebook page, obviously, as everyone does these days, but I want to make sure that you all know that we also host a group, the Texas College and Career Planning Source. And groups are great because this is a space where you can create community with colleagues across the state, ask us questions, start conversations. So make sure that you've joined that group as well. And then lastly, make sure that you sign up for the playbook, which is our monthly subscription-based email for educators, for practitioners, for folks who are in the classroom or counseling office that delivers just really timely resources each month. So once again, in the chat box, I am adding links for our blog, for our Facebook group, and for playbook registration. And that is all that I have. So I will turn it back over to Laura.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison and Samantha. That was fantastic content, and we're right on schedule. We have 5 minutes left, and we have a couple of things that we might want to get answered here. I'm going to open up the question box right now. Let's see, so that we have an opportunity. So there's a question here about difficulty signing in to play Middle Galaxy. And students had an issue with signing up, email, passwords. So we can, if you would like to send me your contact information, we can have our tech support center take a look at those Middle Galaxy issues for you if you're able to do that. And then, so we definitely want to troubleshoot anything with Middle Galaxy. And as we close out here with a couple of last final questions and thoughts, some of you have maybe, you might have joined a little bit later in the webinar. That is fine, but don't forget to like us and subscribe on the YouTube channel. This is where we put all of our recordings and content for you to be able to access. And then you can see those basically on demand and even search by topic. So if you could take a moment to do that. And we will also, of course, send you a follow-up email with all of this information for anyone that's registered. So we have a couple more minutes before we close out at 11 a.m. So because we really like and we keep track of the feedback that we get from educators, it's really what drives us to make changes and developments in Texas OnCourse. So if you want to take a minute before we close and let us know in the chat box, what did you do well during our transition to remote learning from the onset of COVID last year? It was a very unexpected spring, and I think it's been going on a little bit longer, or a lot longer than anyone anticipated. So if you want to recognize what you all did well, and we can share that with the group on the webinar. And yes, we can get a copy of the PDFs that were discussed on the call. We will add those as attachments and links for you. And yes, we can email the slide presentation as well. So Annette shared one idea, a weekly newsletter with updates and a virtual decision day. Yeah, a lot of people ended up having, we had some fellows in districts that we work with that had virtual college fairs, virtual decision days. Yeah, we definitely switched gears. Every staff member was assigned 5 to 8 students to do weekly check-ins with from Carrie, a virtual scholarship night. Yes, all forms of communication, mailing things, updating websites, newsletter, email, phone calls, maybe social media, virtual events. Everybody learns Zoom or a different platform. Remind. Text messaging. Oh, celebrating senior awards by video. The class of 2020 will always be really special. What a year for them. Some graduations were virtual or drive-by. Yeah, I think a lot of the effort that went into planning was a substantial amount of work that we were not quite prepared for. Great. And then just in the last minute or so, anything y'all are planning to do differently this year after experimenting with remote learning and tools and learning from last year? Anything you definitely plan to do differently? More technology, possibly. Nearpod, I'm not familiar with that resource. We'll have to look at that. Great. Well, I want to be conscious of everyone's time. And so we are going to go ahead and close out at 11. We are right at an hour. I want to say special thanks to Tisha Kolick from Region 13 for sharing those updates, as well as Samantha and Allison. Thank you all so much. And we will be in touch with our email follow-up. And we hope you all take care and stay healthy and safe. And we will give you copies of everything. And thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.